Hello and welcome to Engaging Subcontractors using NEC4 Contracts, our latest webinar. I'm Rob Gerrard, the NEC Users Group Secretary, and this is Ben Walker, NEC Drafter and Consultant. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, really good. Yeah, good to be here.
Looking smart, nice time.
Thank you.
Okay, so some housekeeping. So read through these. Make sure your audio is connected by your computer audio, and if your audio is not working, then it is not connected, so you need to read that and act upon it. There's a questions tab, so probably let Ben have a good talk for 20 minutes or so before we start firing questions in, but there's a space 10-15 minutes for questions at the end, so please do put your questions on the tab in the control panel. And the webinar is recorded, so we'll be posting this on NECcontract.com and YouTube in due course. Thank you. Very, very nice.
I started that going because it takes a while, but I've always wanted to use it. So.
You always want to be on the stage and come out to some grand curtains open. So
that's right.
What are we looking at today then? So today's webinar we will discuss how you decide on the best form of an NEC4 subcontract, and possibly when not to use an NEC4 subcontract, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Quick think about that. I have a real bee in my bonnet with this, but the preparation of high quality documents, today is about subcontract documents, but the importance of preparing really, really high quality documents that we can be proud of. We rush it, they're poor, I do a lot of reviews of them, and hopefully some tips on how we can dramatically improve the quality of documents.
A lot of what we're going to cover is going to be very applicable to the main contract as well.
Yeah,
but there can be an element of laziness creeping in when we're preparing the subcontracts that we kind of want to catch. So
I find that. In fact, sometimes the laziness is copy and paste. If I just push those things down. Yeah, so yeah, I agree. And finally, effective management of a subcontractor. So let's not administer subcontracts. Let's attempt to get on the front foot and manage subcontracts. So how do we actually go about doing that?
Yep. So there's 4 subcontract forms under NEC4, the engineering and construction subcontract, the engineering and construction short subcontract, the professional services subcontract, and the term service subcontract, which is new to the family. And if we just, before we jump into choosing the right one, if we just think about how they might fit together, so this is a slide many people have seen before, typical client design arrangement. So the designer, there's not a defined term for designer in NEC, but they perhaps be engaged by the client under a PSC, a professional service contract, and then we might use a subcontract under the contractor, their engineering construction subcontract or the short form to provide the work. So there's nothing new there. There is something a little bit new here. So here we've moved that designing element under the contractor, and in NEC4 the PSS, the professional service subcontract, actually uses the parties are the contractor and the subcontractor. And the thinking being there is that the contractor is more likely to use this professional service subcontract form than perhaps a consultant is. So whereas it might have perhaps been considered a consultant, subconsultant, we think the contractor, subcontractor works better. And then, as before, the subcontractor under the ECS, for instance, to deliver that part of the works.
Yeah, it is just a name, isn't it? So,
yeah, it's just a name. It's about removing confusion, making it a bit easier to follow.
Yeah, one day, all of these buyer and seller maybe, but
okay. So deciding on the best NEC4 subcontract, so as we've just said in the introduction, the approach is very similar to any contract strategy. We firstly need to consider the nature of the works or services. So what's the you know, are we building software? Are we building infrastructure? What's the nature? Are we operating something? What about the complexity and scale of that? Quite a lot of people immediately think in terms of money, but I always think this next chart is very helpful. So if we think about a continuum of all the activities you might have in construction, from business case, design, implementation through to operation, but then up the y-axis, rather than think about money or value, we tend to think in terms of complexity or sophistication. So it's the likelihood that we're going to have risk matters and the need for a sophisticated change that gives us this threshold between the short contracts, which have nothing to do with the duration, but the brevity of how they're written and their simplicity and how they might map to simpler works, and then the full higher risk, high complexity contracts where you need those additional procedures and provisions to really make them work. And the subcontracting side of this just maps to that.
So in the client side, I always say get to have a project risk register. Do your risk management around conception and inception stage of a project.
Yeah.
Look about avoiding, reducing, mitigating risk. Same process for the contractor.
Absolutely.
So they start at receiving and tender documents. So you start looking at the risk associated with all of the subcontracts, with your delivery of the work. How you're going to avoid, reduce, and mitigate it. And the contractor's own version of the project risk register will help them decide the level of risk and the degree of sophistication required in managing the subcontracts. I wonder how many contractors actually have risk registers, project risk registers. Actually, we can use risk registers now.
We can.
It's not an early warning register. There's no clash anymore.
There's no clash,
so get rid of the word project. This is good. Save the words. So contractors equally should have a risk register, just like the client's project manager in the head contract.
Yeah.
Do you see that happening? Do you see many contractors with such a register, or do they do it in here still?
I think it's always happened, isn't it? And I think what you alluded to before about the language being a little bit confusing in NEC3, and that's now gone away. I think we can really embrace just good project practices, good management practices. Just another small point. So we have the subcontracts there. Just to stress this point about complexity, it might be that we use the full engineering construction subcontract on a £10 million piece of work that actually is maybe a fence line somewhere in a greenfield site.
The easiest bit of words imaginable, but just incredible constraints and difficult logistics and that.
Equally, we might use the shorter, so that could be the short version. We might use the full version for £500,000 of work, but actually it's a retrofit of some plants in a brownfield site or a building somewhere that lends itself to being a bit more complicated. So
it's the dividing line, isn't it, between DBO and PSSC on there, and that's one of complexity.
So the next thing to perhaps consider is, are there any flow down constraints? What's coming from the head contract that we can't ignore?
So no work on a Monday, or access must be via this route, or do not access this route, or noise limits, vibration limits, all of those things.
Yeah, there might be some other flow downs as well, which just lend themselves. I'm not sure you can instruct somebody to use a particular form of subcontract. I don't know whether that might be. I've seen it attempted. If nothing else, that's an early warning. Perhaps if you think the two aren't going to be.
Certainly, I've seen this in the nuclear industry where the client says, "Thou must flow down these terms, all the way down to whatever tier."
There might be governance.
If you legally can do that, it's questionable, isn't it?
And then I think there's a few things. We talked about risk a little bit already, but I think there's a few R's to this, risk, resource and reporting. So let's just have a little look at some of those in a bit more detail. So risk, we can maybe think about it in a few different ways. But before we start choosing a main option or a selection of secondary options, or maybe creating Z clauses that push or take more risk, we need to think about what's important to the contractor. And I keep thinking about this in the training sessions I deliver. Because some people want price certainty and they're very fixed on that. And actually, you've probably all seen that chart if you've done an NEC training course, you'll have seen that chart with A, C, and E plotted on the chart of employer and contractor risk. And I think that works, that chart, because it's suggesting that priced contracts are low risk for the employer and high risk for the contractor. And in this case, contractor, subcontractor. But I think that's only one side of the story, because of course, for value for money, you might fix a price and then not need it because the risks never come to fruition, or the uncertainty never comes to fruition. So I think understanding what's really important, this is a key question before we can go into a proper procurement. Of course, there might be a balance of the two that you want to achieve, and then we could start looking at various incentives or ultimately a partnering for like option C and D.
I do that. Sort of time cost quality, triangle, and ask people to understand their clients or their contractor on where do you think this particular organisation sits? Is the bias towards time cost or quality, or is it somewhere in the middle? And don't be judgmental.
No.
Each one's different.
There's no wrong answer.
No,
It's just a better or worse fit for a given context.
But it will help you set up a subcontract if you know that time is of the essence, or money is the most important thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then it goes back again to understanding that it always worries me when I see procurement teams have got a template for their subcontracting, and that's the one we use.
Straight jacket.
It just means that we've leapfrogged that bit of strategy, and we've just gone to.
I see that with some clients who say we use option C for everything. You think, well, that's nice, but not necessarily correct.
We'll come on to something else, maybe the resourcing bit where that might shed some other thoughts on. So, what are the contractor's objectives? What are we trying to? Sorry, what are the client's objectives? So, not just, and that's not a typo. What's my objective as a contractor and subcontractor? But what's my client trying to do? Because I mean, aligning with the old.
Hopefully they're reasonably aligned in the first place.
And what are the risks that I'm carrying? So I can think about those. I mean, they are basically the things that are in the contractor's liabilities and some of the compensation
delay damages or things like that.
But again, just in the same way that we would be harvesting early warnings through contract data parts 1 and 2, we should be doing the same with our subcontractors and suppliers and understanding what those look like, and then having a discussion on who's most appropriate to hold those, and maybe some early mitigation. Okay, so that's risk. I think lots of people intuitively think about risk, and that might be the only thing sometimes that procurement teams might think about in terms of how best to tailor a contract. I think increasingly this is becoming thought about, but in my earlier experience it wasn't, and worth just mentioning. So what resources do we have? Because actually this choice between certainly the main options, do we have a price contract? Do we have a target contract? Is it cost-based?
So A, B, C, D, E.
Yeah.
Well, it's not only...
F isn't available, actually.
Yeah, I said F, but anyway.
No, you didn't. No, just completely the story,
But the degree of different competency for managing option A or B is quite different to C, D, or E.
Absolutely. So, and A and B is different.
So what you're really worried about with A is assessing compensation events, really. B is remeasuring the bill of quantities, different resource again. C, D, and E is now about collecting defined cost in the correct way.
Absolutely.
And declaring it. All very different skill sets, aren't they?
They are. And so,
so do we have capable resource? Do we have sufficient resource?
Yeah. Do we, for option C, D, E, do we have cost engineers, commercial accountants? Is our audit function aligns in terms of expectations to what we're going to do? And what are we going to do with the forecasted defined costs that we're going to see?
Spreadsheets, pencils, and rubbers don't really cut it these days.
I still
see it, but it is beyond that.
So we still need quantity surveyors, engineers, but also cost engineers and estimators. Estimators are crucial when you think about how compensation events are dealt with.
Yeah,
they're effectively an impact assessment, the before and after the event.
Who's best placed to do that? Got to be an estimator.
Well, it's almost a mini tender, isn't it? It's like a mini.
I would say it's like a mini offer and acceptance, isn't it? The quotation.
So thinking that way around isn't a bad start. What resources do we actually have, and therefore what strategies and options are naturally open to us? And rather than thinking, oh well, actually, from a risk point of view, it makes sense to do an option C. That's part of the picture, but I think resources are really important, because otherwise we could be, particularly if this is a procurement team, might be setting the delivery team up with something they can't actually manage. So that's quite a crucial point. How far do we empower these resources? So, if we're going to put a project manager in post, do they have the actual power to do these things? Have we checked that, or a contractor, if you like, in the subcontract world? Are we empowering our people enough to keep the momentum on the procedures? And I don't know whether this is less of an issue for contractors, but it's certainly there for clients. It's worth mentioning for contractors. Are there internal organisational structures and governance issues?
Well, I would hope there are.
That maybe we need to double check they're compatible with the procedures, and particularly the timings of an NEC contract. Because your subcontractor, you might have their sympathy with not being able to, accept something within the timescale shown in the contract. But you've still got to do it. You sign the contract, say that.
That I read about, certainly post-Carillion, there's far greater governance now, certainly at tender stage for any contracting organisation. Gone are the days of just chucking in the bid. A few people got to justify why should we bid. Is the bid sufficient? Do we have the capability, the expertise? Which is good. It's music to my ears. Sadly, the price is still too low, but that's another story for another day.
But if you're new to NEC as well, knowing things like the whole compensation thing is much more proceed and quote rather than quote and proceed. So if we give an instruction to a subcontractor that has changing the subcontract scope, that has immediate effect. It's not something that the subcontractor could wait for. And equally, the contractors team need to be comfortable with the fact that they are committed to whatever that defined impact is going to be, defined cost impact is going to be, in advance of. So they're given that instruction in advance of knowing what it is. I'm sure there's proposed instructions, we can explore that, but very often that just frustrates the time, or makes them more expensive. So
they do make it more expensive because you've just added in a week or two of wait and see, haven't you?
And finally, reporting. So how will we report on the contract? What's expected by when? So again, getting synergy with the main contract here could be important. Do we need to capture certain records in a particular way? Again, that might be something that's given to us down from the scope and that we might want to pass on down through the subcontract scope, but it might also be a business practice that we prefer to operate in and that our, we only use a particular kind of scheduling or programming software perhaps, and so it's quite nice if we specify that and use it. What format to receive and provide programs, forecasts, applications. There's some great materials out there. I don't know, can we mention Managing Reality and things like that?
I think we can.
So we just did. So, but those sorts of
keep writing, Barry. 2 more boxes of 100.
So those sorts of resources, it'd be great to see us building our procedures before we start a contract around things like that, so that we're getting aligned expectations early on.
But yeah, no surprises, are there? Put them into the scope effectively.
Put them in the scope and the subcontract scope. So there we go.
Is it got a subcontract scope? I can't remember now. I was just thinking. Must be.
I think it is. I think so.
2 so-called experts.
I think it is. No, it is. Okay. Okay. So last little bit on this. So just consider the synergies. So sometimes the best subcontracting strategy in isolation might be different to the most effective one. So the most effective one is likely to be influenced by how the main contract is set up and the resources you've already got running and establishing it. So it might not be wrong to do an option C or D subcontract. It might be actually appropriate because there's an overwhelming argument that we shouldn't take the risk of volume, and so an option D makes sense. But if your main contract's option A, then you're not probably going to be able to run that with the same people. You're going to need a QS. You're probably going to need a cost engineer in there as well.
And you've got no problem with that? No problem with AC, CA, or any of the
whatever fits. And again, it's not about taking the template and filling the blanks. It's about making those choices first and tailoring it to what's best. And then repetition and consistency on a similar point. Presumably it's going to be easier because define cost for equipment, define cost for market rate for things. We're going to start to build a knowledge of these things throughout the life of the project. Great if we can effectively operate a very similar approach under the schedule cost components, so we're not using a main form here and a short form there. That might be a little bit easier. Repetition through consistency. And key dates. Cover key dates a little bit more later on, but they're a really useful tool, particularly to contractors. So preparing high quality NEC subcontract documents. So what should we do with this? Well, I hope I haven't been too bold in this. I'm
That's
trying
right.
to emphasise it because it basically is the sum of the things we need to do. We need to use the volume 2 user guide. There's a really good codified structure in there for how to set out your subcontract scope and also worked examples of contract data with some guidance. So let's have a look at those. So,
I mean, the origins of that were how to prepare the works information to ECC or something like that, which is superb guidance.
There were 28 places where NEC3 used to talk about the scope. That's the works information in an NEC3 ECC.
There's a lot more now.
There is a lot more. So, I mean, we've got to understand that this is a crucial document to actually make the contract work. And much like contract data fills the blanks in. Actually, there's a huge number of places where the scope is referenced and relied upon. Scope,
and if you say nothing, there is nothing.
There is nothing. So scope is far more important than it's far more than just specification of drawings.
I can't remember where I was last week, but I said somebody, you know, for every pound you have preparing tender documents, surely 99% of that pound goes into this, the scope, the subcontract scope.
It's what you want. And how you don't want it.
Write it in the most concise, precise, plain English way imaginable.
And read it from top to bottom afterwards.
Check it. don't just throw it out.
Well, we could divert into not including extra specification from submissions, tender, and things like that, because there's no order of precedence. So again, it's about having a coherent, good quality document.
Precision. Professionalisation, isn't it? So I've seen this in the past with subcontracts, but subcontract says to me and says, how do I fathom this out then? And we don't want to restart that, do we? How do we fathom out what exactly we're supposed to do? Because the contractors effectively cut and pasted their works information. Don't press restart. And please. So just a technical blip. There we go. That's gone. Yeah, they effectively cut and paste the scope of the works information. So you found out of this, that which you think you should do for us, or what's that effect? Which is just crazy. Lazy and crazy.
Or you see two specifications for the same thing, and then you just trigger an ambiguity in the system. So just to guide us a little bit, that the volume 2 preparing an ECC, again, that's not a typo. There isn't one. There is not a volume 2 for preparing the engineering construction subcontract. But what there is there's a chapter, in this case it's chapter 7 in that guide, that gives you some guidance on specific...
The terminology table you're referring to.
So this guide is essential, long story short. And I think if you get volume 2 preparing an ECC, we don't have it for the ECS. It's not really necessary because they're extensively the same. And so instead of rewriting everything, we've put an extra chapter in volume 2 that just gives you a little bit of guidance on how to use the volume 2 guidance for the ECC for the ECS. And so preparing
exactly the same principle,
exactly
just different words, and timescales and words are different. That's
and it's really short, and actually there's a very brief summary I'm just about to take you through. So there's a terminology table which is just giving you these differences. So contract becomes subcontract, contract data becomes subcontract data. So I'm pretty sure scope is subcontract scope.
If anybody can think of a better word than subcontractor,
I know.
Do let us know.
One, isn't it? That was in NEC3 as well. And then also subcontract data checklist as well. So how do we prepare the subcontract data? So there's a few bits of knowledge here just to be aware of. So essentially, I think you just need 3 things. You need your the volume 2 ECC checklist together with this little bit extra that's in this chapter 7. You also need your main contract data. So whichever contract this is going to sit underneath, wise to have that with you as well. And then there's a worked example. So we can go through those things and.
I mean, the contractor's picking up what one hopes a high quality 10 document in the first place, cutting it into 5, 10, 15 unique packages for all the different subcontract packages is quite a task to do, really, isn't it? And rubbish in, rubbish out. If the starting point is so bad, how do you actually sort that out for subcontracts?
But all the more important that if we're the client and we're putting an ICT out, let's make this when we know they're going to be subcontracting. Let's make this really simple. If we use the codified structure suggested at the ECC level, so we've got our scope, for instance, set out in a really nice coded structure.
It will help.
It will help immensely, because I can almost see the contractor then highlighting by different colours the bit that they're going to break into different packages, and then building their packages off that. So there are no gaps, no overlaps. You know, we're doing it.
So follow the codified structure, write something incredibly precise, and be highly professional. So then main option, you mentioned that.
We mentioned scope. And also period for apply, things like that. So you remember the period for apply applies where there isn't a timescale given to you locally to the clause. And you know, it makes sense, I guess, to just have in your mind that throughout the subcontract, periods for submitting things tend to be shorter, and periods for giving decisions tend to be longer. So maybe we just keep our period for apply dimensioning within that sort of.
Always remember, it's a long stop gap provision, nothing to stop you knocking spots off it, and, you know, and deliberately shorter. So the management bit.
Effective management. So there's probably a bit more to say in this. Again, there's not a huge amount to say preparing, because it's in the volumes, volume 2. But managing effective subcontractor, there's quite a bit here. So there's a bit of knowledge first, perhaps. So again, this extensively lives in volume 4 on how to manage your contract. And for the ECS example, which is based on the ECC with this extra chapter at the front. Again, there's a terminology recap on various different bits and pieces to avoid confusion, so we don't double up on these terms. It's easy for us to talk about the different contracts within the separate correspondence. And then this point about time periods being adjusted. So there's a bit of knowledge about things that we're doing there. But much more important is this need to act and actually do things practically in a slightly effective way. So what does that look like? Well, I think there's loads of things that we can do to get that synergy, get that efficiency going. And some of them that just sprung to mind when we were putting this together were, so we've got these various intervals in contract data for submitting programs, payment assessments, early warnings, having meetings between early warning meetings. If we can get these intervals aligned, might not necessarily all be on the same date, but presumably you might want one slightly before the other, or and it goes without saying.
Well, certainly forecast and define costs, so you can't have everything the same day. It's not going to happen.
No.
But feed it through in good time, such that the contractor collects up all of those threads and puts together something up to the project manager.
And there's an express mention now of subcontractor in the ECC when it comes to early warning meetings. So aligning those things makes a lot of sense. We're properly collaborating them as a broader group.
Doing it properly once only.
Otherwise, So the supervisor in the engineering construction subcontract may attend tests and inspections
of the subcontractor.
Of the
they
subcontractor.
Can anyway.
It
says may watch any test or inspection, or words to that effect, isn't it? That means done by the contractor or any subcontractor. So keep them informed.
So it's not that the subcontract has its own supervisor. It's that the subcontract is identifying the main contract's supervisor and project manager
who has the right to attend or watch.
And for that reason, contract data, subcontract data part 1 is a little bit longer in that regard, because it actually captures those other identified roles and people. So how do we do this practically? So again, we're not just covering the knowledge of what we must do, but how do we do that? Well, it's the verb now is inform. You inform one another of your tests and inspections. Why wouldn't you CC in the supervisor? So that the contract doesn't say you communicate.
So sometimes I'm just in communication protocol, don't we? We just say between the three of us, me to you, you to you. But not during the dots up. That's what you say.
It's contractually compliant as long as you're doing what you're supposed to do. There's nothing precluding you in the contract.
The only thing is if the main contract, the ECC, says the contractor must inform, but actually it's the subcontractor that's informing. Does that mean the contractor's failing to inform?
Like I said, you can't not do what the contract says, but so you need to cover that off, certainly. But come up with some sort of slick way that we're not, because you're right, they are separate communications that need to be given. But look, let's look even
practically. You're saying practically.
Practically, let's look slightly further again and say that all of that provision is caught by the first subclause there that talks about the following only applies where these test inspections identified in the scope. So again, if we get that scope flowing down, then they'll be expecting them at least, and then we can start to bring them into our progress briefing. So yeah, there's that, and also maybe some form of notifying defects in a slick manner as well. So I think it's about having.
Ideally have no defects, but yeah, but if you do have them,
okay, and all of this, I think the culture, the knowledge, the discipline of keeping up with it, all factors in NEC, and having a set of consistent communication templates that use the right verbs. Another thing I found with this is people tend to be less emotive when they receive a communication quoting all the clauses if they know it's been templated. Okay. So if it's part of a
pre-scripted, so if it's from the heart, then it's a problem.
Well, maybe not. Yeah, maybe it's a bit of a legacy thing with perhaps some of us seeing contracts as being adversarial. But if you've got a pre-scripted template that's part of the fabric of a system or a set of Word documents or whatever you use, then it's not a kind of, it can't be perceived as a legal attack where someone's it's just people being blunt and precise. And if we can have common single truths of these registers, so the early warning register is already that, but why not other administrative registers to keep things in track? And finally, things like CDEs, somewhere there's common drawing registers, these sorts of things where we can keep our documents in one place.
Yeah.
And project bank accounts. And I kind of bring this in here because as much as anything, how many times does one thing need checking when we're putting together what's complete? Can we rationalise that and bring some efficiency to it?
Yeah, it'd be good to tag lots of these things. So, how many people have actually created, read, or passed on this sentence or something like that? So, look, there's 17 different people, each spending 30 minutes. What on earth are we doing?
Yeah, and ultimately we link this to the BIM model.
Incredible amount of waste.
Yeah. So how about we link this to the BIM model? The person who's authorised to sign it off, wherever they sit in the contracting tiering, they sign it off, tells the BIM model that it's ready for payment, and then who knows what the future will bring when we can slicken that up considerably.
Daily payments, how about
that? Why not real-time payment?
Why not?
Why not? We won't need Chapter 5.
Why not? Chapter 5, payments. 5, it can be just one word then.
So, and finally, from the kind of theory around what we might do, what we can actually do, is just remember what key dates are for. So we introduced this slide. I think sometimes we see key dates sort of littered into contract data because people, I think, jump to a conclusion as to what they mean. They mean significant milestones. I've got this very important thing that I need. Sometimes they're confused with sections, or so I put key dates in. But
it's not well understood. I have seen key dates. I saw 101 contract. Another one I saw 12 progress meetings. So each progress meeting was a key date. So it's a key date, but anyway.
So they are optional. You don't need to use them. And if you're a client signing an ECC contract with a contractor, and that's the only contract you've got on your project, you're unlikely to need them. I can't think why you'd want them necessarily. If you're then the contractor with 4 or 5 subcontracts and they're interrelated somehow, maybe there's a M&E contract, a civils contract, a software contract, then suddenly they're interdependent with one another. Key dates
more likely,
much more likely.
It could be just one part of 2 subcontracts, isn't it? This little thing needs to happen before.
Yeah,
it's a key date before the next subcontractor.
Yeah.
So it's not you're not putting the whole lot of 2 packages together.
No,
parts of packages.
Just little parts of them. So essentially, what they do then is they operate so that if the contractor decides the work is not met, so the subcontractor's work is not met by a certain date stated, then if there's additional cost in carrying out that work or cost paid to others, including the client, then it's paid by the subcontractor.
Yeah.
So that's how it operates.
And rightly, people get nervous about this because you don't pre-liquidate.
No,
You don't know the extent of failure in terms of condition or time, so it's a risk item, isn't it?
Yeah. So just to kind of give a picture to that, if we imagine taking the 2 or 3 different programs from the different contracts from the different subcontracts, and we put them all on a light board and lay them over one another,
Call Joe,
so you can sort of
yeah.
see through them all, then the key dates would be the bits that
Yeah.
you could put a thread through to link them together. And actually, I know it's slightly off topic, but I think it's always important when we're putting dates on to remember their reality pairings. So we wouldn't put a completion date on there without a planned completion date.
Mm-hmm.
Or sorry, without a planned completion. So we'd have a completion date, and then we'd have completion when we get there, before we get there, planned completion. And I think that's obviously really important, because you need to know what that terminal float is. And no less important for key dates.
Key dates, no difference.
And actually, I quite often see on programs people put key dates on,
and that's it.
But they haven't put the date when they plan to meet the condition for that key date, and therefore they can't preserve their there's no really they can't.
Nowhere to go.
The clause doesn't operate to move the key date because they don't know when the date for planning to meet it was. So these pairings are really important to show both the contractual deadline and the date when you plan to.
And that also applies for sectional completion. Same concept.
Well,
Same concept.
Yeah.
And of course, these key dates may have nothing to do with sectional completion. May have nothing to do with completion date of the whole of the works.
Yeah. Okay. So when we looked at choosing the right contract, there's 4 of them. And they can be used in any combination. And I think you said,
there are others though.
There are others.
Professional service, short contract, or the like, if you really want to.
You can put them under a framework.
You can do anything, can't you? Really?
We looked at
they're the obvious ones with the word subcontracting.
Well, they are. We looked at preparing them and really point you to volume 2. Find the equivalent main contract form. Read the little chapter on how to use that guidance in the context of a subcontract, and then obviously have your main contract there as well. Consider not just the risk allocation, that's the one everyone jumps on, it's very, very important, but also give a view to resourcing as well, and then how you're going to report and drive it. You can need earned value, is the client ultimately expecting earned value analysis of some kind on this? How do we report that? Think about, when managing, think about getting efficiencies and synergies with coordinating your workshops. Would you invite a subcontractor along to an assessment of a compensation event? I don't see why you wouldn't.
Why not?
Have a workshop on that. It saves the 2 layers.
I'd rather have 3 people sat in a room for half an hour
trying to get to the right
at the same time.
Yeah.
In fact, you might unfold something. You might actually find that there's an alternative which is better, or you don't really need it, or actually it costs a fortune. Do you really want to do this, or it's going to significantly impact upon I don't know what? So much.
The formal submission and acceptance of something like that, really should be that. It could be a.
So why don't we do that? It's a painful process, isn't it? Going all the way down, all the way back up is just such a painful process.
It will be if you use subcontractors as well. Okay.
So questions. So how do I get the question box on? I can't. Oh, no question. What was received? No questions.
We've connected and
so we had a technical problem.
Technical problem.
The question box is disappeared, so we have no questions. What do you want to talk about?
We can think of some questions.
Questions. So how often do you see that good discipline?
Increasingly, actually, I see it increasingly because it's not a. I think people are understanding that constantly having communications going backwards and forwards. On our 3rd, 4th iteration of a quote, for instance, it's not good practice. Not if you've got a chain of subcontractors who are waiting to know what the outcome is. Because it obviously affects everybody. So getting people together, exactly the same with the program. I think we've done an earlier webinar on this where we say, you should be able to be in a position, no matter how big the project is, where you can submit a program and accept it within a couple of days. If you're building every day, twice a day, worked for one job I was on where we had a whiteboard on the wall and we would divide that whiteboard into three boxes: yesterday, today, tomorrow. The guys are updating it twice a day. The schedulers take pictures of that. They go up and update the program.
Yeah.
And then it's more of a
that's real time, isn't it? It's a real time.
But if we're not doing that,
yeah,
then where are we? So a monthly exercise doesn't really seem.
But it's better than it was. So bear in mind that so with the program, on my very first job, the first time I saw a program, I think it was 6 months after the job finished.
Yeah.
So that's the first program, because the program was used as like a claims device rather than an actual management tool. So it takes time, I think, to lever people away.
What about the Q&A helpline? Is there any subcontractor related questions we've been getting on
Q&A helpline
on the NEC helpline?
I may have some. We have some questions. Bear with us. How much technical fun can you have in a day? Right, so how do we ensure subcontractors understand how to use the NEC? How do we ensure everybody?
Joint
training. Why would you not do joint training?
Facilitated training, yeah.
And if it's perhaps a brand new sector, brand new country, have a joint briefing. You know, get people. Certainly, the estimators. What you don't want is subcontractors falling foul. And you know, I'm a big fan now for single fee percentage, but trying to explain to new people about the difference between the subcontractor fee percentage and a direct fee percentage, and this is plain English and all straightforward. And no, it isn't. This is quite complicated for options A and B.
So in NEC4, we've got a single fee percentage now, which makes it a bit easier. And there are some things that have switched around in some of the definitions for subcontractor as well. So
joint training, joint briefing. No reason why you wouldn't do that. How does bear with me? How does the contractor under ECC4 engage a designer? So you suggested a professional service subcontractor, not a PS, professional service contract. So the subcontract itself, so the professional service subcontract, that is better written to be used as a subcontract rather than the PSC, which is a head contract.
Yeah, so it's still the PSS, still the professional services subcontract. It's just that it's the parties under that align a bit easier. It's still otherwise ostensibly the same as the PSC.
Okay, what would you like to change in NEC4 in the next edition? NEC5, nothing, it's perfect. Next question. I presume I can still ask a question to the presenters. Of course you can. Please do.
You can now, anyway.
You can now. We're in full control. We never actually lost control at all, did we? So, let me find that. Cool. Can NEC contracts apply to all types of buildings and infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely.
That's very easy.
Is there anything you could think that it couldn't do?
Well, I would use it. I would only use NEC contracts on those that need professional management. So if for something really straightforward, refurbishment of your mansion, something like that, new front door or the like, don't bother. No. Something to be professionally managed. And also, what are the pros and cons of using NEC? Wow, that's another story for another day, isn't it?
Well, it's the same throughout. The subcontracting is for the main contract. So we're taking change in bite-sized pieces. We're removing shocks. We're using foresight collaboratively through programs and early warnings, and it's a much more collaborative.
What comes as a shock to me is how long this all takes to happen. Bear in mind, my first use of NEC contract was 1995. 24 years later, I'm now 1,000 years old, and
it's because you need something that isn't easy to get, and that's culture. So you need knowledge, and you need knowledge of what you've got to do. That's true for any contract. You need discipline and compliance to keep up with it. But the thing that NEC requires is a kind of cultural mindset of a step change in more traditional ways of doing things. So, and I see that actually increasingly with all contracts is that they are demanding collaboration, they're demanding cooperation, trust.
More mindset, more attitude and mindset.
Mindset, the way we do things, which is why I kind of
behaviours, ethics, all those things.
Behaviours are crucial, absolutely crucial. Professionalism being a really important one.
Okay, so a number of contracts now are asking contractors to manage subcontractors on behalf of employers. I know it's not standard NEC arrangements. What are your thoughts on this? So, asking contractors to manage subcontractors.
I think they would, wouldn't they? I think that's the intention.
That's what they do anyway, isn't it?
I think so.
Oh, unless it's the employer's subcontractors, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder whether.
Not too sure.
What we shouldn't do is leapfrog the contractor. Maybe that's what the question means. So what we shouldn't do is we shouldn't have the project manager formally communicating with the subcontractor, giving instructions, things like that. So we must never leapfrog. That chain. They are separate contracts. That's a pretty small point. But.
Okay, when a program is updated, should the key dates within the contract be changed? No. So we're only changing the key date because of an instruction by the project manager in the head contract or the contractor in the subcontract, or as a result of a conversation event. That's about it, I think, isn't it? It's only 2 reasons you can change your key date.
Yeah.
Now you might change your plan. That planned.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are the deadlines which only change in accordance with the procedures of the contract.
Yeah.
The reality of when you plan to meet that condition for a key date,
change,
which is a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
It will change.
Yeah.
It will change, and it will change due to progress of the works, and the fortune or misfortune of what the weather's like or whatever else. So we absolutely must show that reality. That's a requirement under the contract to show that reality.
Okay. Next question. Core clause 15.2. Subcontractor attends an early warning meeting if attendance is required. What is the time period? Have had PM requesting a very short time, less than a period. So there are no time periods.
There are no time periods.
This is professional judgment, isn't it? So some early warning meetings are drop everything and meet now, and that does mean in person. So just use your phone or.
Yeah, I've not thought of that. I'd always.
Or electronically.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to have a physical meeting.
Better if you can.
Or if 3 of us can meet physical meeting and 1 can't, then beam them in, Scotty.
Well, we could make this webinar 2-way, and then you'd have, it'd be a few hundred of us on.
Yeah, there's no reason why not.
There's no reason why not. A bit like giving opportunity to the supervisor to witness a tester inspection. There's no time scale to do that.
Half the guys now, the operatives, have got the cam, just like the police and all the rest of it. So, actually, why don't you watch the guys doing the thing via live cam?
Yeah.
Do you really have to be there in person?
But the project manager is about to discuss something that is
very relevant
for
the subcontractor.
So you're keen to get there, but the project manager knows that the conversation won't be as good without you there. So somewhere in there is a question of accommodating each other to get the best outcome, which is everyone.
Well, let's not bully or pressure people. Let's do the right things. Let's do the right things and see how we can accommodate. But certainly using virtual platforms can work perfectly well. So one more question. Why one more question? 10 minutes yet. We're fine. Does the NEC4 contractor actually have the program overhead or even expertise to put together high quality NEC4 subcontract documents for an inquiry within his own tender period? Good question. So do we have the resources? Do we have the time? Do we have the overheads? Do we have the inclinations? Will we see these things that you said today? Well, will that become the norm? Can that become the norm?
Well, if we don't, and we only get a certain level of information, then the rest of it transfers into risk, doesn't it? And that itself will, that level of uncertainty or lack of detail will itself either be solved with a staged approach. So we maybe don't, we choose a slightly different strategy and we get a few more knowns known before we go further, or it'll be priced to suit, and we'll be choosing options that maybe there's argument for option E at some point. If there's enough unknowns.
You'll get out of it what you put in, and if you just cut and paste, budget and leg it, what do you think is going to happen? So do you know of any cases where the NEC contract does not work well in specific civil engineering? I think of a project or a sector, no, but when the contract doesn't work well, I think it's where people get it wrong. So when people ignore the contract and start playing in a different place, that causes major problems.
But it can actually go wrong before it's even started if you choose inappropriate options and Z clauses.
This one you're like, this is a question from Ben Walker, but not the Ben Walker, it's another Ben Walker. Okay. So another Ben Walker here. I've worked on projects historically. that have required work section scopes to be written prior to the completion of the design in order to hit performance. Oh, running out of space here. No. Okay, another question. That won't work. That won't explode. Apologies about that one.
Well, touching on performance indicators, we didn't mention it, but X12 and X20. Yeah, just because the head contract doesn't have X12, we should still be able to use that. Maybe with the promoter could be.
Without a doubt, the fact you can have a horror show head contract, ill conceived, ill thought out, you know, all the wrong things in there. There's nothing to stop you moving away from that and using X12 or X20. You can use option C, you can have bonus for early completion. You set up your subcontract how you think it will help you as a contractor deliver your obligations up the supply chain.
And I was looking in here actually at some of the things that this suggests around that. So it's using incentives to bring it all together. Yeah, collaborative.
A few more. If no response is received from a project manager regarding early warning notice or a compensation, is it deemed accepted? Well, there's no such thing as accepting an early warning notice. It's just a notice that goes onto a register that may or may not have a subsequent action.
Some people like a reply to early warnings.
What are you going to reply? Thank you.
You don't contractually need a reply to an early warning.
There's no clause.
There's certainly no acceptance.
You choose which of those early warnings on the register you wish to discuss an early warning meeting.
Early warnings aren't solved by replying to them. They're solved by managing them through the early warning register. And then in terms of the CE, if we're talking about contractor's notification and compensation event, then there is a week, 7-day period, before the project manager has to respond. I don't think it should take a week because it's an objective test. Is it one of the ones in the list? Is it not left on? Which if they don't reply to, then the contractor can remind them. And if that reminder goes unanswered, then it becomes a compensation event that is notified, and the contractor may submit quotations. And then that kind of rattles through again, ultimately ending in a sanction of treated acceptance.
Okay. Slightly different topic. On a recent NEC course, it was said that if the main contractor makes changes to a standard NEC4 contract, it needs to be red line changes. It's a great idea, but is it written down in guidance notes anywhere? Certainly, if you get a copyright license from Thomas Telford, you have to. You should give a part of the license, give a clean and a red line version. It makes absolute sense, doesn't it? So the only way a contractor can do that is if they've got a copyright license for the engineering construction subcontractor.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the copyright.
Did the question come through? Yes, it did. Couple more, because Tony's looking at me. Should you highlight when a subcontractor management fee is insufficient, or what are you going to do about it? So if you believe that the fee percentage is insufficient, I don't know about you, but I'm a fan of, you know, one chance at tender stage, and you either accept what's in front of you or you don't. I don't think, unless you're negotiating, if the fee is too low, then, and it worries you, don't award the contract to them. Award it to somebody else. Look at the whole offer that's in front of you. It's fixed, isn't it?
I think you could trample on all sorts of procurement rules.
I think you've had it. You know, you like a bit of blue touch paper there, aren't you? By saying we like that, we don't like that, we want you to change that, we want you to make that higher or lower. You've had it.
Don't forget in NEC4, things like preparing quotations now are not a disallowed cost.
Yeah.
So there's some things that are
less things to go wrong.
Less things to go wrong. So quotation for proposed instructions, if they're not used, you get the defined cost of having prepared them. So there's a few things that might narrow that a little bit.
We've answered a lot of questions there, and we will follow up with answering any that we didn't do in a written form. So when Tony posts the video, we'll attach the questions and answers that we haven't answered here. So thank you very much indeed. So a few more things then to finish. Coming soon, we have an NEC4 facilities management suite. Very good. So there's a joint initiative there, or there was, between NEC and IWFM, and watch this space. There's a training calendar, 2020 training calendar. The decades are just flying past now, aren't they? 2020.
Yeah, so that's available now. So that's
going to be my last
public
decade
courses.
of working. I'm out of here. Yeah. So have a look at the training calendar. And 2 new accreditation courses for NEC4, Term Service Manager and Supervisor Accreditation. That's in the training diary, no doubt. And that's it. Contact us. That's our details. There'll be another webinar in a month or 3.